Hello and welcome to Thinkpod, powered by the FII Institute. I'm your host, Mark Barton, and for over 2 decades, I've been at the forefront of global conversations on the issues that matter the most. In this series, I'll be meeting with the leaders who are rising to tackle the grand challenges that face humanity right now. Together, we'll be discussing the radical ideas and transformative solutions that'll benefit both people and planet. In this episode of ThinkPod, we speak to Tony Berkley, Head of Investments at the FII Institute. Tony's been working in impact investment before the phrase impact investment existed. Alongside walking us through his investments, he outlines how a new generation of talent in the Middle East is driving investment and why it's harder than ever to ignore social responsibility. Tony, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mark.
Now, the FII, it's slightly unusual because it's a non-profit with a twist, with an investment arm. How does that work?
Correct. So we're a global, independent, nonprofit foundation and think tank. And one of the things that makes us a little different is the fact that we have a clear mandate, impact on humanity, and 3 operational pillars to achieve that mandate, one of which is investment. We're also very well known for our convening, which we call exchange, and we're very well known for hosting one of the world's 3 largest investor conferences in Riyadh. In addition to that, we have a think tank, and this podcast will hopefully go on the shelf as part of our growing collection of important think tank products. And then the investment arm is called ACT. So we felt from day one, and this came from the vision that our board had for the Institute, that we wanted to not just bring people and ideas together, but act on them. And one of the great ways we have to act on them is actually put some investment dollars behind some of the wonderful technologies and wonderful companies that we're made aware of through our platform. So that's what we do. We invest in early stage startup companies that we think can have a positive transformational impact on the world.
What are some of those companies that you've invested in?
So we got started last year on the investing side, and we're very pleased to have made 4 investments so far. Our first investment is a company that's already public. It's called Lilium. It's an electric vertical takeoff and landing company from Germany. They're the European champion in a space that's increasingly important for the decarbonization of air travel. These are battery-powered aircraft that can compete in the regional travel market. So they're based in Munich. So you imagine a 2-hour hop from Munich to another city in Europe, which you can do in this silent, beautiful craft that's not polluting the air as our current aircraft are. Lilium is our first investment. We also invested in a company that came out of KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. So the Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, is very fortunate to have one of the leading STEM universities globally. It's called KAUST. And they're very keen on translating the scientific breakthroughs of their faculty into companies, into products and technologies that can really have an impact. And we worked with a company there called Red Sea Farms, which is an ag tech pioneer. And they have an extraordinarily innovative tech stack from the seeds all the way up to the roof and the way they use solar that allows them to grow plants in desert climates using sunlight to power it, and a 50-50 saltwater freshwater mix to water the plants. It's extraordinary and has the potential to reinvent desert agriculture and create food security in regions of the world that now depend upon imports, high-priced imports that are flown in or shipped in from other places. So it's a very interesting company. They're now selling their technology into desert regions of the U.S., and it's amusing for the Saudis to see themselves as exporting technology to the U.S. So a very successful ag tech company. We invested in a company out of Paris, France. It's pushing our thinking around space. They're called Interstellar Labs, and they're a group of engineers, climate scientists, artificial intelligence, cognitive scientists, folks that are good at computer simulation and modeling, and they've asked themselves an intriguing question. What will we need to do to create livable conditions for humans on Mars? If we were actually going to settle Mars in the future, what would we need to do? And they run a whole set of simulations, and then they take those insights and they engineer products that we can actually use now on Earth. And it creates these kind of new creative ways of tackling food production, waste management, heating and cooling. Their first product is on the market this spring, and they call it the Biopod. And it's kind of a souped up version of aeroponic farming. There are other aeroponic farming companies. I have invested in some myself in my career in impact investing, but this one is unique in their ability to grow multiple seeds and to do it in a way that is even less resource intensive than other aeroponic solutions on the market. So we're very excited about that. And then finally, another company out of Paris called AZMed. They are the European leader in artificial intelligence-driven X-ray diagnostics. They're the first CE certified company in Europe to be able to use an artificial intelligence engine to support doctors in diagnosing a fracture from an X-ray. And they've brought that product to market. They're now going to be entering the US market. And what's fascinating about them is the mission of this country. So you talk about the Institute. We have this impact on humanity as our mandate. And this company, from day one, wrote into their ESG plan that they wanted to remove from the world hard copy X-rays and the toxic silver nitrates that are involved, the chemicals involved in that process. So by using AI, making the process digital, supporting doctors all throughout the globe, their ultimate goal is to make the world a safer, less toxic place. It's a very powerful mission, and it drives their success in the market.
How do you measure the impact of those investments?
So for us at the Institute, we firmly believe that in alignment with what's called Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, that we're only interested in and only looking for investments in companies with technologies in sectors that directly address the challenges and the goals or the priorities of these sustainable development goals. So for example, for us, that means sustainability, healthcare, education, and we're particularly focused on the technologies of AI and robotics.
Yeah.
And so for example, in the case of Red Sea Farms, so this is a company that's producing tomatoes, it's growing tomatoes, and we look for, are they saving water? Are they saving energy? Do the tomatoes have a nutrition content that's equal to or better than other products on the market? And we actually look for companies who have a scientific background, real evidence that proves that. And then we get excited about that and we think, okay, we can take that breakthrough into the market, and it has a great opportunity then to really improve things.
This ESG framework, why did you feel the need to launch it? What's unique about it, and who's going to use it? What are your ambitions for it?
So the chairman of our board, His Excellency Yasser Al-Rumayyan, gave a mandate to the Institute that we needed to create a fairer and more inclusive framework and scoring system for corporations who are housed in emerging markets so that ESG investors, which is a growing subset of investors, will be more likely to consider these companies for investment. He had identified that this was an issue. So we've been working on this for a year. We've done more than 20 interviews with leading investors. And one of the big surprises for us was that there's unanimous agreement that the current existing scoring methods just don't do a good job.
Why not? What's wrong with them?
Well, this is what we've dug into and figured out. So we realized that, investors identify that there's a weakness in the tools they have to use. And what many of them will do, and they tell us this in the interviews, they have their own, called homebrew, their own Excel spreadsheets, right, that they use to make their analyses because they don't rely on the existing tools. So we did a deep dive, and we hired Ernst & Young. They have a very credible, very successful practice in sustainability and climate change. And we worked with their partner who leads that practice. His name's Doug Johnston. And he has developed ESG scoring systems for other nonprofits. For example, there's a well-regarded scoring system called the Climate Action 100+, which he helped build for a nonprofit based in Boston called Sarah's. So we knew he was the right guy. We knew he was the right team, and we dug in. And what we realized was that corporations in emerging markets have characteristics and circumstances that are unique to emerging markets, and they're not well picked up and analyzed by a set of KPIs or factors that were developed in developed markets. Yes. So for example, one of the leading frameworks is a framework called SASB, which I know well. I helped support that in its development 15 years ago at the Kellogg Foundation. They came to me, they asked for grants. So I know exactly what that framework is about. It was developed in the United States. It was a strong regulatory approach. Each industry had their own little committee, and they went together and they figured out the KPIs and the questions to ask for those industries, and it was well aligned to the markets in the United States. The issue is that when you take that framework out to Brazil or Russia or South Africa or China or even further to pioneer markets, some of those conditions that made sense in the United States or make sense in Western Europe simply don't in these markets. And the rating agencies have kept the same KPIs, they've kept the same weightings, and the outcome or the unintended consequence of that is that if you're a really well-run corporate whose headquarters happens to be Bangalore or Shanghai, your market realities are different from those of New York, Paris, and London. And as you report and as you organize your company's activities, they're not as well aligned to the questions that are being asked in these frameworks. In addition to that, we found that the frameworks themselves, when they score, they put a huge weighting on country risk. So that means, in effect, that if your country has issues in governance, as most of these countries do, has issues in other areas, that affects your company score unduly, we thought, right? More than the sector that you operate in. So in partnership with Ernst & Young and led by Ernst & Young, we came up with a scoring system that would weight the sector more highly than the country, which would allow these well-performing corporates to show their best results. We came up with a system that really focused on fewer KPIs, fewer questions, but only the most significant ones. We call that materiality, the most material questions and KPIs. That had a couple important impacts. The first was that emerging market corporates don't have to report on the same questions that companies in the US do because they're regulated differently. And they were getting penalized by not having answers for every one of the 300 questions. Well, it makes sense, right? They probably have answers to questions that aren't even on SASB, right? Because SASB wasn't developed to capture those realities. So by reducing the KPIs and focusing on the important ones, we also moved away from a system that penalized companies for not reporting on questions that weren't relevant to them in their markets. Yeah. And when we took out these forms of bias, we kind of peeled back this onion layer by layer, we realized that about 1/3, the highest performing group of these emerging market corporates, about 1/3 of the companies we tested on, received a better score because there was less bias to country risk, there was less bias to disclosure, there was more focus on the KPIs that matter from the sectors they operate in. The other 2/3 either remained the same or actually got lower scores because also we're digging a little deeper. And you can also see the ones that simply aren't doing a good enough job. The nice thing about it for an investor, and I'm an investor, is I can come and look at the score. I know the tool was designed for this type of asset versus being designed for a different type of asset and applied into a market it doesn't really work for. And because it's a simpler, more straightforward analysis, I can understand why the score is higher, why the score is lower. And that, for me as an investor, is probably the most important thing. Let's not forget, these are models. Models aren't designed to make decisions for investors. They're designed to inform the decision making. They should raise questions. And so for me as an investor, here's a company, let's say a telecom company in Saudi Arabia. Wow, it's got a really strong ESG score. That's going to pose to me an interesting question. I'll look in and I'll see why.
How many investors do you hope will take notice of this framework?
We want to see investors grapple with this framework. We have designed it to be modular so that they can take components of it. They can take the whole thing. We have an Excel spreadsheet that we can provide to them, or they can take a component that's important for them. For example, the current ESG scoring systems do not say much about the positive impact of a company. And that's intentional, right? They're designed to really talk about the firm and its risks. They're not designed to talk about the firm and how it, say, improves community living conditions around it or contributes to the national development priorities around decarbonization. But this framework actually takes a step further and says, in addition to the traditional ESG ratings, we can actually now talk about the degree in which these companies and their activities are well aligned to the sustainable development goals that matter the most for their countries, their home countries. And it allows their investors to talk and think a little bit more about the positive impacts of these companies and, reward them for a company that's doing important work in an emerging market to reaching a sustainable development goal. That's a good company.
Is that the real challenge, measuring social impact, measuring impact of investments when it comes to impact investing?
I've been in impact investing since before the phrase impact investing, so maybe 20 years at this point. I've really grown up with the field itself, and measurement remains a significant challenge in the field. Would I say it's the most important challenge? I would probably say that the absolute most important challenge is not measurement directly. It's really getting our minds and getting our tools and frameworks organized so that when we think about investing, we are integrating impact as a lens within our thought process. Now, for some, that's got to be a number, right? That's how they work. That's how they think. That's what's credible to them. Then fine, measurement's a key challenge. But for others, it could be a question of thematic impact, of alignment, of logic, right? And so I think that's fine, of qualitative dimensions. To me, it's less important that we measure every dimension of impact. It's more important that we make it harder and harder for the investment community to operate as if impact doesn't matter.
And do you get a feel that that's still the case?
With the generational change and the way the world, I think, has evolved, it's becoming harder and harder now for the finance community to make an argument out of a Milton Friedman seminar from 1973, which is what they were doing when I entered the field in 2000. That's become harder and harder, and people want to talk about, as they should, the role that finance plays in society and community and the planet. Now, there's disagreement at that point, but I think it's become a little less accepted to just say the only thing that matters to me is the dollar sign.
So that returns for impact, profit for purpose, still here or not?
Yes, I think it really is. Profit for purpose, doing good and doing well. These are phrases that have actually been around for many, many, many years. And I think what happens in my mind is that each generation sort of reinvents it. So when I entered the field, what I was excited by was investing in and supporting a generation of entrepreneurs who really believe that the way to challenge these dilemmas and solve these problems was through the enterprise form. They felt that the very best way to solve problems was create companies based on new business models, new technologies.
But you were never sacrificing profit for purpose, were you?
No. Yeah. The idea is quite the opposite, really.
Exactly,
it's that you're gonna have a better company, a higher growth company, a more valuable company, if you can solve on both of those.
Yeah. In May 2022, Bloomberg reported a steady increase in international investor interest in the region, Middle East, North Africa. Why are investors, flocking to the region?
My experience has been that talent drives the markets. Fundamentally, it's talent. So if you're seeing an influx of investors interested in supporting companies and projects in the Middle East, it's because there's a generation of talent in the Middle East that knows how to talk to these investors, knows how to develop these projects, and is driving these projects. And that's kind of what I see in Saudi Arabia. So I'm very fortunate to work now in Riyadh. And it's exciting because Saudi Arabia has really invested in its people over 10, 15, 20 years. It has sent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of its young people abroad to get the best education possible. It's invested in its universities. And what you see now coming up is an incredibly well-educated young country with entrepreneurialism running at every level of it. And that's what I look for. When you see that dynamic happening, that's when you know the projects will come, the companies will come, the investable opportunities will come.
Is there still reticence among overseas investors because of maybe corporate governance standards?
So look, the law is a framework you have to work in. It's true if you're in the US, it's true if you're in Saudi Arabia. If there's some reticence, it's probably unfamiliarity. Right? Because the Saudi laws are going to be different from, say, the common law tradition in the UK or the US laws. So, and that's a barrier. That's part of what we're doing in the inclusive ESG is we're saying that, look, ESG investors have gotten very comfortable with investing in their homes, in their backyards, in their stock exchanges, right, in their countries, right? But we want to push them to think a little more broadly. And it's going to be the same thing in this area too, right? When you deal with a legal framework that's different than the one you're familiar with or comfortable with, you may have heard things about it that are concerning to you. Those create barriers. That's real. And I think the work of institutes like FII Institute, the work of impact investors, aggressive investors, entrepreneurial investors, is really to constantly push these markets outward, to test these edge areas, and to take those risks. And there really tend to be risks around education. You need to educate yourself about that reality. And consistently we've found that there's more and better opportunities to be found when we challenge our sense of familiarity.
On the subject of opportunities for investments, like you say, do you have a regional specific focus? I mean, you're global, yes, you made that clear, but might you, if we talk in 2-3 years, have more Gulf investments, US investments, European, Asian?
So our intention is to develop a modestly sized portfolio of early stage deep tech companies that is truly global.
Right.
And that fits our mandate and our mission. And it's built into our strategy and policy, which the board has agreed upon, where they have limits to the amount of concentration in any single region that we can have in terms of the number of companies we invest in. Now, we do see really good pipeline, really good investment opportunities out of the Middle East. Europe is particularly active for us. Europe has all the ingredients for tech ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem, but has traditionally had fewer angel investors to support it and fewer venture capitalists to support it. In the US, in the famous VC areas like the Bay Area, you have quite a bit of capital there chasing these ideas. So for us, we're finding that Europe, the Middle East, I'm sure the US as well, we're very excited about Asia Pacific, but COVID has been a real barrier for us.
Yeah.
So we think there's going to be tremendous opportunities globally.
What's funding like? What are the funding markets like within the Middle East? Is there a funding gap? Are entrepreneurs, startups, are they getting the money they need? Is the money there readily available for them to grow?
It's a great question. So Saudi Arabia itself has the fastest growing venture capital ecosystem in the globe. And they've done a great job at the government level of coordinating with the large sources of private capital, the large family offices, the sovereign wealth fund, to provide capital for this type of investing. And they've really, in 10 years, gone from minimal VC activity to a very thriving and vibrant ecosystem.
Let's finish with you.
Sure.
There were you in 2020, Prudential Financial, managing a 200 million plus portfolio.
Correct.
And then this move to the FII, the transition to Saudi Arabia. What motivated you?
I just realized that this was truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's a startup foundation. You have truly transformational leadership at the top. And I turned to my wife at the dinner table, and she said, I said, what do you think, honey? She said, go for it. And I was like,
That was it.
I didn't hesitate. And it's been everything I've hoped for and asked for. I feel challenged absolutely every day about it. I mean, ESG investors, 90% of their funds are in Europe and North America, and they're just ignoring these wonderful growth engines, the emerging markets, where 90% of the population happen to reside and 50% of the gross domestic product. It's an absolute opportunity for an investor. And this is what I love to do. It's what I did at Kellogg. It's what I did at Prudential. It's what we're doing with our deep tech early stage strategy out of our own balance sheet. So I really love these challenges, and I think they're the ones that, they're the ones that motivate me and inspire me. So I'm a very happy camper.
Tony, you've inspired me, and I know you've inspired our viewers and our listeners. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
In these turbulent times, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to ThinkPod for more insight and analysis.